Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. March is National Kidney Month. Your kidneys filter all of your blood up to 25 times a day. Your kidneys help remove waste and excess fluid. It filters the blood. It controls the production of red blood cells. It makes vitamins that control growth and release hormones that help regulate your blood. If you have diabetes or high blood pressure, heart disease, or a family history of kidney disease, or if you're over the age of 65, talk with a healthcare professional about your risk for kidney disease. If you end up needing a kidney transplant, once you're added to the National Organ Transplant waiting list, you may receive an organ fairly quickly, or you may have to wait many years. Connecticut Paid Leave can help by giving up to 12 weeks of income replacement when you need it for your own serious health condition or that of a loved one. Connecticut Paid Leave also covers chronic conditions for appointments, treatments, or flare-ups if you're having kidney issues or you need a transplant. My expert on kidney transplants is Nick Arsenault, who's a registered nurse for over 18 years, and he joins me to talk about his journey to get new kidneys and how he used Connecticut Paid Leave to help ease the burdens of finances. Welcome to the podcast, Nick. Nice to see you.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to finally be able to have this conversation today.
Well, let's start at the beginning chronologically. Let's talk about your health and when you noticed something wasn't quite right with you and when you found out it was kidneys.
To make a very long story short, I knew I had some kidney issues, from when I was a kid, just, with genetic syndrome that runs in my family. But it wasn't, doctors always said it wouldn't probably be till I was in my 40s, maybe 50s when there might be an issue. But sure enough, right out of nursing school around 2006, started not feeling well into, my new job, my new role. And, one of the staff members I work with at the hospital was like, you know what, you probably should just go get checked out. Just make sure it's nothing going on. Well, lo and behold, sure enough, got some blood work done while I was there. And one of the kidney doctors, sure enough, that I worked with came in and I'm like, why are you here? And I was like, it's my kidneys, isn't it? And he said, yeah, unfortunately. I was in the hospital for about a week just to kind of, get my blood pressure under control. Had to actually start dialysis pretty much immediately right then and there.
Wow.
So basically, kind of like you said, once I was stabilized, I was discharged home. I got connected with a nephrologist in the community and started connecting with them. They're the ones who really took over for really the first 4 years of my kidney journey, really, I guess you could call it, to get me on dialysis and, help me get that all under control. And because I was so young and otherwise healthy, besides the kidney issues, they said I was a good candidate for a possible kidney transplant.
So when they said transplant, it must have been overwhelming for you.
It definitely was, especially kind of like you said, I've been a nurse for a very long time. And, I was a baby nurse at the time, but, of course, learned about transplant in kind of general terms in nursing school. But, it's not something you really think is going to be in your own sort of, background or, a vocabulary that you're going to use. And so it was kind of a big deal. It's like, I'm potentially going to be having to need an organ from someone else to stay healthy, continue living a healthy life as best as possible. Dialysis is great for what it can do, but, they always will tell you, a fresh, healthy kidney, there's nothing that replaces that. So it was definitely a big reality check at the time.
How stressful is dialysis?
It's very, very stressful. I definitely had my share of ups and downs with it. Dialysis in and of itself is, just a treatment. It just helps to filter the blood, remove, the waste products, the toxins that our bodies make on a day-to-day basis. It helps to manage your blood pressure. Your kidneys help to regulate your bone health. There's so much that they do
that
you don't realize until they're not working properly. So dialysis is great for what it is to be able to help kind of stabilize things, but it really only replaces a small percentage of your actual kidney function to keep you healthy. So a lot of fatigue, a lot of medication management, a lot of appointment follow-up. Um, and it depends on the type of dialysis you're on too. If you're going to a clinic 3 to 4 days a week, I was fortunate I could actually do it at home every night. So I was able to actually still work full time during then. I look back now, 20 years, and I don't know how I did it then,
Yeah,
but
wow.
do what you got to do sometimes. So it's definitely almost a full time job, really.
How did your friends and family respond to the news that you needed a kidney, and how did you find a kidney donor? What, it was a living donor?
For my first transplant, yes. So what ended up happening is, my family, they weren't necessarily shocked that this was happening. They were shocked it was happening in, such a young age, of course, because we knew there would be potential concerns down the road as I got older. But, in your early 20s, not exactly what you're anticipating. But they were immensely supportive, unfortunately, because the potential for kidney issues runs in my family, like my brother and my dad, and, their own health concerns, they weren't able to actually potentially be a living donor for me because the doctors didn't want to risk their health or anything like that. But otherwise, a lot of friends of mine, especially my colleagues who are in healthcare also, that really understand that, they were really such a rallying force to say, like, let's see what we can do. Like, let's look for how we can get the word out for a living donor. And sure enough, it ended up actually for my first kidney transplant in 2010 was actually one of the nurses that I had worked with at the time.
Oh, that's such a sweet
So
story.
yeah, I still get goosebumps every time I think about it because, just for someone to so selflessly want to give part of themselves to help me live a healthy life and stay alive and be with my family and still work and travel and all of those things. It's just such an immense blessing and a gift all wrapped up in a big, kind of like that Lexus commercial at the holidays, a big red bow on top of everything. And it's really such a life changing thing once you get a transplant, how different you can feel after.
Yeah, walk me through that day. You're preparing to go into surgery, and this other person, this nurse who is such a wonderfully selfless human being, is also undergoing surgery at the same time. What was going through your brain when you were going through that?
I don't think it really clicked with me until I was actually going into the operating room for myself. Because they actually had me and my living donor. She was literally in the, pre-op area right next to me. So we were there so early in the morning together. And because the way the timing and process works, they take the donor first to, start the surgery process to take her kidney. So it just felt very unreal. And the whole time I'm like, are you sure this is what you really want to do? You can back out. And, I love you to all ends of the earth, even if this doesn't work or you just change your mind because it's such a big decision. But I remember going in and they were like, this is happening. This is, we're getting ready and, seeing my doctors and all of that. It just kind of was like overwhelming. Wow.
And then after that, the aftercare, tell me about what your recuperation was after you got the kidney transplant.
Yeah. So, I mean, it can be a little different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
A kidney from a living donor tends to what they call wake up much more quickly. Sometimes they can be a little sleepy when it goes from one person to another person's body. That's not, their natural home. I was fortunate that when I first got her kidney, it woke up right away. It started functioning right away. So even though I felt uncomfortable with, the surgical pain after, and of course, all the medications they start you on with suppressing your immune system, it really felt like a night and day difference when I was already even in the recovery room. Because of course, you're retaining all these the toxins and everything that the dialysis doesn't always keep up with that well. And I just remember the first thing I looked at, the palms of my hands, I was like, oh, I haven't seen pink palms in a really long time.
Wow, that's funny that you noticed that right away, huh?
Just so random like that. And
Yeah.
just even my She was already feeling different. Um, it was just remarkable to say, like, whoa, like, holy smokes, like, you don't realize, like, how tired you are or how run down you are until you start experiencing what it's like to feel well again.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was just, kind of onward and upward from there.
Yeah, I know a lot of people use social media or even billboards to try to get a donor. You were really lucky that you found someone that you worked with. And
Mhm.
how did she recover?
She recovered extremely well. Even that day, right once we got to our rooms on the transplant unit where we went to for after surgery care, that afternoon she was already, us nurses were tough, but they already had us like up and walking, right that day just to help promote the recovery. And there she comes tooling into my room with her little IV pole and a smile on her face, and she's like, oh, it's definitely a bit more uncomfortable than I expected, but um she's like, I'm just so happy to see you're already doing so well, and how you're feeling. And um it's just kind of one of those things that I may not see her every single day or talk to her every single day, but it's still like I still have this personal connection to you literally 24/7.
So tell me about your second kidney transplant.
Yeah, so that's a journey of itself too. Unfortunately, I had even with the medications, as good as they are, I had experienced a rejection episode with that first kidney around 2016. Um, and unfortunately, they were able to do a really great job stopping, the immediate rejection, but what they call the chronic or long-term rejection, unfortunately, doesn't really go away. But they were able to at least control the symptoms and the management of that kidney for um, pretty much a good close to 4, almost actually closer to almost 6 years, which is actually really good, all things considered. um, and unfortunately by around 2020 is when my kidney function with my first transplant really was starting to get to the point of you're not quite at kidney failure yet, but you're getting closer. Your numbers are, really starting to get borderline, but you qualify to, get back on the transplant wait list, even though I didn't need dialysis again at that point yet. But of course, it's, just a reality of, shoot, I might need dialysis again. Um, but armed with my previous experience, goes a long way with kind of helping where you're at now. So I definitely was much more proactive this time around, sharing my story, like you said, on social media. Had, the magnets on the side of my car, my partner's car, some friends of mine from work had ones for their cars, being like, can someone help, get tested? Definitely had probably a few handful of people get tested, but unfortunately, their matching wasn't for me. Um, but I was on the wait list, like I said, and surprisingly enough, because I'm type O, the wait time can be a little bit longer. My blood type is typically the universal donor, not the universal recipient.
Mm.
So I can only take a kidney that's a type O to begin with. So the wait time tends to be a bit longer. Um, but that was in about 2020. I got put on the wait list, and it was a Sunday afternoon of all times on an April Sunday that I got the call from Hartford Transplant being, hey, we actually have a match for you. And it's like, seriously, really? You're calling me? Like, this isn't real. I'm supposed to still have at least another 3, 4, maybe 5 years before I might even be, high enough on the list to have a match. But um, they were just like, no, we're completely serious. This one really matches you the best with where you're at. So that completely threw me through a loop, not expecting that. And, gotta hurry up, get to the hospital within, an hour or two just to
Oh my
start
gosh.
all the blood work, final x-rays, EKG, like final cross matching and everything. It was definitely a lot different for me mentally because my first donor, like we've been talking about, was a living donor. So I knew her, there was that element of, human connection to that.
Yeah.
This was actually, fortunately for my health, but unfortunately a deceased donor. So it was just kind of, the whole idea of, sad that someone had passed away for me to be fortunate enough to get a kidney. But also at the same time, that individual and their family were so in tune with wanting to, kind of pay forward to, like they say, donate life basically is really as corny as it sounds, but that someone was selfless enough to want to donate in their unfortunate circumstance.
I think it's really important to be an organ donor on your license. Emotionally, this must be really draining. And how did you deal with that emotionally? Did you go and get some help? Did you have a therapist that you could talk to? Because boy, oh boy, when it's health issues, it's a lot to deal with.
It absolutely is a lot to deal with. And I haven't really had a therapist or like a counselor in the last few years. I will say, though, during my first round after, when I was still on dialysis before my first transplant, I absolutely went through a period of time that, for lack of a better way of saying it, was just kind of a dark time for me,
Yeah.
just felt like I was going through the motions, like just didn't know, am I coming, am I going, like what's actually happening, is this ever going to happen? So it was a very difficult time, and I'm sure my love to my family, especially to my mom, she was the one that was like, I think you just need to do something. Like, you really should consider seeing someone. And this is where I think it's true that nurses can be the worst patients, that we're just kind of like, no, we got it, we're fine. But it was really at a point in time that I was just really kind of struggling, just going to work, going home, going to work, going home. And I ended up actually connecting with a close friend of mine that I worked with, whose fiance at the time was a therapist himself. And I was like, not that I want to meet with you, but do you know someone, like some folks that, would be a good, connection maybe for me, since you know me, what my personality type is and whatnot. And sure enough, I had talked with maybe 2 or 3 different therapists at the time and didn't really feel a connection with them. But then I finally met one that he had recommended, and it was quite honestly one of the best decisions I made. And I thank my mom for really kind of planting the seed and kind of, giving me that, tough love little nudge a little bit, because that really made such a huge difference. And it really helped me just kind of get a lot of that emotion out, find a way to just kind of find it the place in my life, and even help me have the conversation, with my own primary care doctor, to even be on even like a little bit of an antidepressant for a couple of years, just to kind of help me through that moment in my life. And I'm the first person now that will say, don't be too proud to ask for help, or even just to talk to someone. It doesn't mean you need to go on medication. That was always right for me in that moment in my life, but it is such a life-changing thing, and it's such a benefit. I really always talk to all of my patients about now to, take advantage of that, because it can make such a big difference in your whole self.
I'm so glad that you got some help when you really needed it. That must have been a really dark time. You don't know if you're going to find a match,
Right.
and you were already going through, so much with dialysis. That's a lot. So your second transplant, you didn't really feel like you needed that, because it was sort of like, it's now.
Yeah, it happened so quickly because the call comes in, there's a match, like we need a decision right now. Like, do you want to accept? It's all the what ifs of what's going to be happening. So on top of the emotional, situation of like all of this happening that you weren't expecting to have happen that quickly.
Yeah, it's amazing. So what was your recuperation like, and how long were you out of work?
Yeah, so this time, no 2 surgeries are ever really identical. Looking back after my first transplant, I feel like my recovery was definitely very much, I don't want to say a walk in the park, but it felt like a walk in the park. I was only in the hospital for 3 days and was discharged home. Everything was working great. Started with my follow-up with the outpatient transplant team at Hartford at that point, which really is even not much change to how it is now. But after my second transplant, this kidney took a while to wake up on its own. So I was actually in the hospital for almost about a week for this one. And, my numbers and lab levels for kidney function really actually didn't start kind of going down and normalizing for probably at least a good 6, maybe 8 weeks after, which is perfectly normal for some situations. But I was in the hospital for about a good week. And then, once you're home, you're typically following up with your doctors at the transplant team and their offices at least, 1 to 2 times a week, getting blood work at least twice a week to check how your labs are doing so they can adjust medications, really see how you're doing and how you're feeling, how your incision's healing. So it's very, very, very fast paced. and it goes by much more quickly than you realize. But this time around, I was like, you know what? I'm older now. I'm not
Right?
rushing the process. I'm letting myself take the time I need. And I ended up being out for a full 12 weeks for this one here because I was like, you know what? I'm not pushing it. I'm just letting it, let the recovery happen naturally and not, overly rush to get back to work.
So is that when you use Connecticut paid leave?
Yeah, so it ended up happening that, once I was, kind of stabilized a few days after my transplant, I had actually, talked with my boss, being like, here's what's going on. I'm probably going to be out for the 12 weeks because I worked with the company I did at the time. I had to put in for my anticipated medical leave, which triggered the short-term disability with my work. Um, as many people probably will attest, that doesn't cover your full income by any means whatsoever. It's one of those, it's better than nothing, that's for sure. But, that still leaves a huge portion of your salary, hourly pay, whatever that looks like, that's not paid. So then, of course, you're scrambling, well, how am I going to cover my bills for the rest of the month or the rest of the week? Make sure I have enough to pay for my medications. All of those smaller but super, super important parts. And that's when one of the HR representatives that I was working with and assigned for my case was like, well, you can connect with the Hartford for your program and, see what they might recommend. So I ended up talking with my caseworker who was phenomenal at the short-term disability. And she's like, well, you're familiar with the Connecticut paid leave program, right? And I said, I mean, I've heard of it. I've seen maybe a couple spots on TV about it, but I don't really know about it. And she had a great conversation with me. But she's like, what you can do is you can, submit your application for the program. And if anything, it will help supplement, the income that you're not getting to replace. And sure enough, I submitted the application. It was actually a very painless process of really just signing online, setting up my claim. And it was just a couple medical forms I had to have my transplant doctor fill out. And they were able to take care of that very quickly. And my coordinator got it sent back. And next thing I knew, my caseworker at the Connecticut paid leave program was like, she's like, I can tell you're going to be approved because you had a transplant. And it's clearly a significant medical.
Yeah, serious health condition. Yes.
But she's like, once we're processed through, she's like, it will absolutely cover, a large percentage of your salary while you're out. And it was such a breath of fresh air to be like, okay, at least I know I'm going to be struggling. Because at the time, too, like most people, I didn't really have a robust, emergency fund or anything. I had some, which would help me through, but, it doesn't replace or didn't replace at the time, the salary you get when you're working full time. Even at my age, I'm still paying off some student loans. It helped to make sure I could afford my prescription medications. Especially for transplant, you have medications you have to take for pretty much for life to help keep your immune system from attacking the, new kidney and just the other regular medical bills, co-pays, all of those things, make sure I have enough to pay the electric bill, all of those, important things that you're not left sitting there wondering where's the money going to come from.
Well, it's nice that you could sit and heal and not worry about your finances.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of been one of my biggest take home messages is, if you're eligible, apply. It can really make a difference between sitting at home, like you said, worrying about something, or being able to sit home and focus on yourself and where you are in your recuperation.
What are your follow-up visits? Do you have to go every 6 months? Do you have to see your doctor more frequently than that? Less frequently than that? What is the routine that you have to go to now? Because it is a chronic condition, we call it. So this is something that's not going away. This is something that, you're going to be living with.
It's long term. I mean,
Yeah.
transplant kidney stuff never going to be leaving my vocabulary for the remainder, of my lifetime.
Right.
But at this point, the typical follow up after I got the transplant was pretty similar. The standard is usually, and again, it's very specific to each patient too, but it was very close to what I had previously, where it was, at least twice weekly visits, blood work twice a week during those visits for, I'm going to say maybe it could be upwards of 4 weeks. And, as long as things are improving, you're healing and you're feeling well, it'll eventually extend to just, a weekly visit and weekly blood work and slowly kind of stretches out over time. And in my situation now, I probably was very fortunate and very lucky because of my prior experience and because I'm a nurse too. I'm probably very type A when it comes to managing all of my own stuff. Um, I was able to do the blood work twice a week, but I only had to see my doctor once a week. And if there was anything that was changing or updated, I did a phone call or, a telehealth call with her or with my nurse coordinator. But now I'm pretty much seeing my doctor about once every 4 to 6 months.
Oh, great.
Right now, and I'll be 2 years out from the second kidney this coming April. So I still get blood work probably about once a month just because it's my second one. They just want to make sure they're keeping an extra close eye on things. But I actually see her about every 4 to 6 months now. Sooner, obviously, if something comes up or if I have a concern or anything, but knock on wood.
Yeah. And I think it's so wonderful that, you got to take Connecticut paid leave. What advice would you give someone about Connecticut paid leave who's dealing with a serious health condition like yours?
I mean, the best advice I guess I can give people is just, make sure you're leaving no stone unturned. Make sure you're really having conversations with the people that you're working with, whether it be a health situation similar to mine, or if it's another chronic health condition that you have that maybe isn't quite so similar. It's just really important to, just know what your options are and just be informed as best as possible. And I will always sing the praises of, the doctors and care team members that I've been able to work with, just even through my years of my professional life too. But, never be afraid to ask to talk with, a social worker that's connected with the office, because I feel like they're such an indispensable resource of information. And they know about a lot of these different programs, and even have the conversations with your doctor. If they don't know, they can at least point you in the right direction of who to maybe ask those questions to.
Right. It's wonderful for us to know that our program made a difference in your health journey. I mean, I think that's what we all hope, right? That we meet a Nick, and that we meet someone who's really utilized our program and it made a world of difference for you and continues to do because you're now taking intermittent leave.
Yeah, I mean, you just never know what's going to happen or what comes up in your life. And, having chronic health issues like I do, the odds are more in your favor of something potentially changing or developing down the road. But yeah, because of my kidney issues, I ended up subsequently, unfortunately, developing gout. For anyone out there who's ever had gout, it can be an extremely painful condition. And in my case, because especially when I had the rejection issue, that my kidney function wasn't as good at that period of time. It wasn't filtering out certain parts of things like what's called uric acid in my bloodstream. And unfortunately, for some people, like in my case, once it kind of reaches a certain threshold in your body, it can actually start crystallizing into joints and can cause a lot of severe pain. And because of my medications, I can only do certain things with certain medications because I don't want interaction problems. And, in the last year, I really kind of struggled with what's the right medication to help with managing this. And lo and behold, the traditional medications for gout I can't take because of the interaction it can have with my immune suppression medicine for the transplant. And they ended up, my provider was like, well, there's this infusion that's newer. It works really well in a lot of folks. Research shows it works great, in folks with transplants like yours. The only thing was, of course, it's an infusion every other week for about 5 to 6 hours each time. And, with my current employer, it was a case of, well, doesn't really qualify you for a short-term disability issue. You would potentially be covered under the Connecticut paid leave program. And then, of course, with all this discussion that we're having,
Yeah.
I was like, who would have thunk I might actually be tapping into, that resource again. And sure enough, at this point, I've been through my third infusion already. And knock on wood, it's working extremely well. It's doing
Beautiful.
what it needs to be doing. And again, it helps to kind of cover that gap of, my intermittent leave or my medical appointments at this point.
Yeah, I think that's important. What advice would you give someone who has a family history?
For family history, again, the biggest thing is just really knowing where your risk stands. It's really about being proactive. It's really just, having that conversation with your doctor. If you don't have a doctor, reach out to your insurance. If you're on an insurance plan, have that conversation about finding who's a good, primary care provider in your area, whether it's a doctor, nurse practitioner, a PA. So that way they can start, really having that conversation to work with you. So, what can I do to eat healthier, manage my blood pressure to prevent kidney damage, make sure I'm not developing diabetes, things that are big risk factors for developing kidney disease in a lot of people. And if you don't, it's even, just having conversations with your family about, hey, have you had, your numbers checked? When was the last time you saw your doctor? Just not being afraid to have that conversation, because the unknown can be a scary thing. But once you know what your numbers are and where you're at in the big picture, you know how to be proactive to help protect yourself and take care of yourself too. Just never taking one day for granted is really always my big thing here.
Well, it was wonderful speaking with you, Nick Arsenault. I want to thank you so much for sharing your wonderful and inspiring story on the Paid Leave podcast. You're really amazing.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure having the conversation today. Finally being able to sit down and actually talk, one-on-one with you. And, if I can even just impact one person to maybe start thinking, but also, like we've talked about, just to be aware if you are going through a health concern or crisis, don't be afraid to look into, hey, maybe this Connecticut paid leave can be that, little bit of a safety cushion to help make sure I can make it through until I'm feeling better again, and be that stepping stone for them to help, to bigger and better things down the road.
Well, thank you so much, and continued health to you, Nick.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
For more information or to apply for benefits, go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.